Coming up on Time for Hope.
And I can remember in my prayer life crying and just turning to the Lord and asking and saying to Him, Lord, I don't understand your system because you've taken away someone that I've loved dearly.
Join Dr. Freda Crews, licensed professional counselor, and her guests as they provide practical solutions to real-life problems on Time for Hope.
Yes, you have just tuned in to Time for Hope, a faith-based mental health program. I know that we have made some drastic changes, but I want to assure you that it is Time for Hope and that I am your host, Dr. Freda Crews. And another change we're making this time is that I'm going to be teaching. I will not be joined by a guest, although we will be bringing in past and present interviews with guests related to the subject of grief. Yes, I'm going to be talking about and sharing with you and even teaching on the subject of coping with grief and loss. Now, why would I choose to do that? Because it is something that everyone knows something about. We have done just about everything imaginable on Time for Hope for the last 13 years. We've covered most everything that a person or some people could experience. But I am sure, I have no doubt, that everyone knows something about this subject, the subject of grief. Now, you might not have identified some of your griefs because all of them are not monumental or Super Bowl griefs, as I would refer to them. Some of them are minor league griefs, but they are grief. It's interesting that we find Job going through his time of trouble saying, "Yet man is born to trouble as surely as sparks fly upward." We could actually paraphrase that and say that all of us are born to experience grief as surely as the sparks fly upward. Grief is an inevitable experience in life. I can remember a young grandson, just 3 or 4 years old, had a favorite kitten, and that kitten had an accident and died. And until this day, I can picture him or see that picture in my mind of him holding that little dead kitten and crying. And of course, it was like a baby because he was so young. We can grieve over pets, and that can be a very real grief. Or even something as simple as losing a ball game. Sometimes when we see the players go off the field, they go off with bowed heads if they have not won the game. So when we think of grief, we probably, some of these things we've never put into the category of what we're feeling being grief, that we're grieving over the loss of something. I have said many times when I am presenting to mental health professionals that every person that has ever appeared in my counseling office was experiencing some kind of loss. So there's a strong possibility after this, and I hope that this is true, that you will see grief or think of grief or become aware of grief in a different way. But we still have to think in terms of the grief of losing a significant person in our life. That research shows that actually the loss of a spouse poses the most intense grief. In my counseling office, I have not found that true. I have found that the loss of a child presents the most significant or intense grief. And as I've already mentioned, we go from that monumental grief of death, that is permanent, and what we call finite grief, something that we can identify. right on down the ladder to the lowest thing, such as losing a pet and grieving over the loss of a pet. So I hope that I can develop an awareness of the griefs that we experience in life. Now, the ones that we actually feel and experience and have no difficulty doing, that's fine, but those that we are unaware of or refuse to grieve can sometimes, those losses that we refuse to grieve can sometimes cause us the greatest pain and loss eventually. The first thing I would like to do then is to define grief as I'm talking about it, and because it is a very painful process, but I'm going to take it just as if you were in a classroom and I was teaching on this subject. I'm going to give you the definition of grief: the cognitive and emotional response to a significant loss. Now, I have already said it can be a loss that's not so significant, and there can be the cognitive and the emotional response. But significant loss is what will overshadow what I'm going to be teaching for at least the next couple of weeks. Significant loss includes the loss of anyone or anything. That can be a person, a position, a place, or other lost object that has emotional value. Loss by death is the most significant and permanent loss. Some refer to grief as the price that we pay for caring for someone else, for loving others, because when we lose them, we are going to experience grief. Is this something that is just, it is something that's part of our humanness, and I even carry it further than that, and that is that God wired us that way. He made us that way. He actually gave us tear ducts. And if they get clogged up, they can cause you a medical problem. So God intended for us to grieve when it is appropriate and we are experiencing loss. And then we think of grief, it's a universal process. It isn't the rich nor the poor. It isn't, it crosses all lines socially, ethnically, and even whatever else we might say. It crosses all lines having to do with our humanness. It's a universal process of attempting to cope with any personal loss. There can be detachment, grief, divorce. We can lose a body part. There can be tremendous grief in losing a body part. Recently, with our economic condition in the United States of America, there's been tremendous grief over the loss of jobs. We get prayer requests in all of the time with people asking us to pray with them because they have lost their job. Some have lost their retirement savings, and there is bound to be tremendous grief involved in that. Many have lost their homes with mortgage foreclosures. What grief there must be in having to move out of a home and letting it go. And then the empty nest. Many women go through the grief of an empty nest when their last child leaves home. There can be the loss of health, bringing tremendous grief. And there's a possibility that what you have felt with these various situations that you did not recognize as grief. The physical, even physical, mental, and emotional response to a loss. And then there are those that grieve deeply over the loss of their youth. As people age, and many and hopefully that's what we look forward to, in spite of the fact that it has its disadvantages. We all want to grow as old as we can, generally, but in the process of aging, there is the recognition that we are losing our youth. Sometimes we try to deny it, as we're in denial very often about lots of kinds of other losses. But there can be grief even over the loss of our youth. So you have seen, and you can see already, that grief covers, as we would say, a multitude of various kinds of losses, from the lesser ones to the greatest ones. So what are we to do with our grief? Where, there are so many people that have ideas about what we're to do with our grief. There are churches that teach that people are to be strong during the most intense grief. If their loved one has gone to heaven, then there should be a celebration, and there should. But celebrating and not grieving, that isn't the kind of celebrating that one wants to do. In fact, we can grieve and celebrate their homegoing all at the same time. But one thing we don't want to do is suppress our grief. No more than it's healthy to suppress anger, which should be expressed appropriately. Well, I'm not going to put the word appropriate on grief, because each person's grief belongs to them and themselves and them alone. We should not allow, and I'll be getting into that, and others should not propose how another person is to grieve the loss, especially of a loved one, a significant other in their lives.
Right after Jenny's death, the emotion was so intense. I would go to her grave every day and I would weep. And then it became such an obsession with me that I had her picture all over the house. In fact, when I was alone, I would call out her name, Jenny, Jenny. There was no response. And it was an intense time of emotion. And then I began to realize, and it was an act of the will, that I needed to change this. And now I suppose I go to the grave once every 2 weeks. I have removed most of her pictures, but the real trauma came when my 2 daughters came to the closets and emptied out all of her clothes. That was a moment of great sadness. It was so final.
I immediately think, first of all, of the theological questions, because as a counselor and as a pastor, you've heard, as I have heard, what's the big word that comes out of all of this? Why? Why has God allowed this? Why has God done this to me? You know, why didn't He do this? Why didn't He do that? The theological questions just roll in, and probably even for those of us that have been able to provide answers, as it were, for others. So tell me about that.
Well, talking about providing answers, you know, it's easier to answer the questions of others than the question that is in your own mind. And of course, I've had great questions, and I mean, I want to be realistic for the simple reason that we're dealing in realism. And I have asked the question, why? Why did the Lord allow Jenny to go? Why did she suffer the way she did before she died? why under certain circumstances did it take place? And I'll just be frank with you, I'll have to wait to eternity to get the answer to those questions.
If we will allow ourselves to think and even admit that we have these questions, even these doubts and suspicions of God and His activities in our lives, when we experience great loss, as you have in the loss of Jenny, and you're going to say that indeed you did go through that process, and I want to hear how you handled that.
Yes, I try to remember the fact that God can take tragedy and make it a blessing in our lives. Nothing is more important than our relationship to Him. And of course, I feel that my relationship to Him has been deepened. I never did realize how dependent I was spiritually on my wife. She was a tower of strength. And when she was taken out of my life, I felt a void. And I turned to God. I turned to the Lord. I'd served Him all these years. I've known Him since I was 16 years of age. But now I needed Him more than ever. And I can remember in my prayer life crying and just turning to the Lord and asking and saying to Him, Lord, I don't understand your system. I don't understand. Love seems to be so cruel because you've taken away someone that I've loved dearly. I thought, why does God do it this way? Why do we lose our loved one? And I was angry with death. It's a strange thing, that intangible thing called, that we talk about as death. I was angry with the system. And sometimes I was angry with God, and yet at the same time I wanted to be very, very careful not to apply to God that which He didn't intend. But I had a hard time understanding, why does God allow this? And I must admit that there was an element of anger, and sometimes it still comes over me, the feeling of resentment that we have a system such as we do when we come into life, we love the Lord, we serve Him, and then suddenly the one that we love most is taken away from us. But you know, as time has gone by, I think my relationship to the Lord has been deepened, and I'm beginning to understand that although she's gone on to be with the Lord, and for that I'm deeply grateful, and of course I miss her greatly, I'm having to have a new beginning in my life, and particularly in my relationship to Him. And I've been reading valuable books. I've been reading the Scripture, and I think that I've become more sympathetic to people who are suffering in this way.
I always want you to know that we appreciate your being a viewer of Time for Hope. And as you have just seen, grief goes across all boundaries. It's no respecter of persons. And we're also going to be talking about grief. I've given a definition for it, about the pain of grief. And of course, as we think about those significant losses, we think about the most intense pain that a person can experience or feel. I want to go back to Job. Most of us are familiar with Job. By the way, if you're not aware of it, the book of Job is the oldest book in the Bible. It dates back before the rest of the books. It was written before the other books of the Bible. So it's the oldest book of the Bible. And Job, remember, I have already quoted this once, and I'm going to do it again. I'm going to give you two quotes from Job. Yet man is born to trouble as surely as sparks fly upward. And again, we could put the word grief in there, that we are all born to experience grief. And then another quote from Job, man born of woman is a few days and full of trouble. Now, I don't know any other way that any person is born but of woman. So that includes everybody. That and Job said that our days are few and they're full of trouble. And I know you think that is a very depressing thought, and it can be, but there are resources available in Jesus Christ to see us through these days of trouble. Actually, in the long run, we'll be talking about being transformed, as a matter of fact, by going through a period of grief over a significant loss. So it is a painful process. What kind of pain? When we think of it being a painful process, what kind of pain are we talking about? It can be acute psychological pain. This involves emotional turmoil. Then, of course, there can be those theological questions, asking the reason why. Many clients have sat in my counseling office, and their biggest question being, why? Why did God take them from me? Why did God allow this to happen? And the whys can go on and on and on. But it's very interesting, even people that have not been religious, when they experience a significant loss of someone in death, it can bring on these theological questions. They want to involve God, that God, they think of God as all-powerful, all-loving, most people do, and then when someone is taken from them, they kind of change their mind and begin to wonder if He is all-powerful, if He is all-loving, and they reason, if He were, then He wouldn't have let this happen to me. So as a therapist, I have had that question posed and have gone into helping them understand that it is a normal human emotion that they're experiencing, and that the questions also will come and can come during a grieving process. And then I don't think I've ever counseled someone that has experienced a loss by death that didn't try to find some way to be guilty for their significant person or the significant person in their life's death. Why wasn't I there? I can remember a client that had stayed by his father's bedside throughout his last days, always feeling that he always needed to be there, and I personally know that feeling, and he needed a break. So he went outside to walk around outside the hospital and get some fresh air, and just to get a little break. And when he arrived back in his father's room, his father had passed away while he was gone. And the guilt that this young man was experiencing, that's a pseudo-guilt. That's what we call a false guilt, but it was very, very real to him. So guilt can be a very real part of the pain that one experiences in the loss, the permanent loss of a loved one. And then we can also expect depression to be a part of the grief process. When there is significant loss, as a general rule, the strongest person in the world is going to experience some of this pain that I'm talking about. And as a general rule, depression will always be a part of the grief process. So to feel these things, and we'll be going down some more of the pain that people experience in grief. To feel these things does not mean that you are a weak person. It does not mean that you have to be ashamed. It does not mean that you don't have enough faith in God, as some people would tell you. It just says that you have joined the human race. And later I'm going to be talking, later in this series, I'm going to be talking about giving yourself permission to grieve. So I can go ahead and throw that out and tell you, I will give you permission to feel the pain that is a natural accompaniment of a significant loss as you grieve and mourn the loss of a significant person in your life. With the depression, there can be anger, there can be sadness, there can be a sense of helplessness, and helplessness is real once they're gone. It's something that can't be changed, and we'll talk again about acceptance, and that we have to ask the Lord for the serenity to accept the things that we cannot change. And the death of a significant person in our lives is something that we cannot change. Now, you're going to want to join me next week as we continue our study on the coping with grief and loss.
My friend, colleague, and author, H. Norman Wright, has written a great little book titled Experiencing Grief. Having lost a young adult son, grief would be a subject that Norm has personally experienced, and I know that you will find his book helpful if you have suffered the loss of a loved one. You may have a copy of Norm's book for a donation of any size to the Ministry of Time for Hope. When you help us financially, you team up with us in offering hope to grieving, hurting, disillusioned, confused, and sometimes hopeless people. Through our ministry, others learn and become informed so that they can minister to hurting people around them. Recently, I was approached locally by a lady who wanted to make sure that I knew she was a regular viewer of Time for Hope, and she went on to relate, "I also want to tell you that your show proved to be a great help and blessing for me as I passed through a tough season in my life." We like to hear these kinds of responses to our ministry because that is what the Ministry of Time for Hope is about. So accept my challenge to partner with us financially as we offer hope to potentially millions of viewers each week. And I remind you in closing that we do take each and every prayer request that we receive to the one who knows all about your situation and can intervene in your behalf. You may write us at Post Office Box 2169, Spartanburg, South Carolina 29304, or call us at 1-800-669-9133.